Do you know where you are going? Eh? Do you know where you are going? Eh? Do you know where you are going? Eh? Do you know where you are going?
Salutations and good vibrations, family. Welcome to another session of Taseti Soul Family Discussion. On all the currency that's listed in our country, the United States, it has the term, "In God We Trust." So let's dig deeper into the meaning of these words. This will be a bit of insight that will surprise you into understanding what or who you are worshiping. At the beginning or inception of America, many of the people that came over first were the Pilgrims from England. The leadership of the Pilgrims came from a separatist congregation called the Brownists. The Brownists were early England dissenters or separatists. They were named after Robert Brown and dissenters of the early English church. So the first 200 years of immigration coming from England and the first settlers into the northern United States or New England were considered Brownists or separatists from the Church of England. In the time of Henry VIII, there was a separation of the English church, which he wanted to set up a new Anglican church, which was a change of the Catholics' Mary's Reign church, in which Henry VIII wanted to change their affiliation to this new Catholic Church of Italy. And the dissenters had other ideas of separating from Henry VIII and the new established Catholic Church. So in March of 1566, Archbishop Parker deprived the dissenters the prayer book, in which 14 of the most radical bishops formed an underground church, in which many of these dissenters met in secret, in which a large congregation eventually shrank because of imprisonment, of breaking the law, and death. Now, this is considered church-on-church crime. And once down to this small congregation, they feared elimination. This group, considered the Brownies, eventually joined together, boarded the Mayflower, and headed to the New World. Now remember, this is the church fighting each other and being separated because of Henry VIII wanting to spread and change the direction of the Catholic Church in England. And Robert Brown was a Puritan theologist who believed in their ideologies and beliefs, which was different than the Catholics. So Brown was a lecturer at St. Mary's Catholic Church in England, where he was a lecturer and spoke harshly and had great dissent for the Catholic Church, being that he was a Puritan. He did not like their doctrine and bylaws. Brown became the leader of a new congregational church and moved to Norwich, England. But the group only lasted 2 years and then separated because of internal strife and dissension. But a year after the church was set up, which was 1582, Brown wrote 2 works. His greatest work was the Treaty of Reformation, without the tarrying for Annie, in which he stated that the church could make legitimate changes without the authorization of the civil magistrate, meaning that they can create anything they want without having to get authorization from any legal or religious organizations. So up until this point, this guy Brown, which was one of the major dissenters against King Henry VIII and the Catholic Church, didn't agree with the Catholic belief and started his own congregation as a pilgrim. So in other words, you had 2 factions, one which was the government and King Henry VIII, And the Catholic Church was against these pilgrims who didn't believe in the new Catholic structure and organization of their doctrine. And because the pilgrims didn't agree with the doctrine of the Catholics coming in with Henry VIII or King Henry VIII, the pilgrims were claiming they were being persecuted and were not being able to be allowed freedom of religion, which at that time wasn't a term, being that the king designated the national religion for the country. Being that Brown was a lecturer at St. Mary's Catholic Church, he was given certain privileges, and those two theories that he wrote, the first book and the second book, made the descent even deeper, and King Henry VIII had him hung. So because of this action, his followers or believers into the Puritan religion thought persecution would surely come their way also. So they loaded their total congregation into the Mayflower and traveled to the New World. Now, listening to these two groups, which were the Puritans and the Catholics, you would think they have some type of civil discourse and be able to discuss the differences they have in their doctrine and their beliefs and settle it as religious people. But up until this point, there was no explanation of what the Puritans believe in. There was no explanation of who was their God, what was their bylaws, and what is their doctrine. But they did create a church out of the New Testament, but not much else was said on their beliefs and understandings while they were in the country of England. But growing up in New England and understanding where they land in Plymouth and looking at their history here once they got here, it was a whole nother belief system, so-called based on the New Testament, but the interpretation and application of the New Testament was radical. It was believed they left England because they were being persecuted and bullied while over in England. But once they arrived in the New World and began to have freedom to execute and process their beliefs in their religion, strange practices and actions were being noticed. Even the indigenous people that were here looked at them strange because even they were not that hostile to their own people. With these practices, you can see some remnants still lingering around today with groups such as the KKK and other white supremacist groups. You will see the hostility that equals these original Puritans. In the colonies, the societies were starting to understand and learn stories of being called witches and being told they are warlocks. And growing up in the church, I don't remember anything about witches or warlocks, but this is what's being practiced by the Puritans up in the New England area when they were crucifying, torturing, and killing on the belief that someone can be a witch or warlock. Many of the actions didn't make sense, and in my opinion, this is some of the reason the Catholic Church didn't want them practicing their interpretation of religion. For an example, they would take a person and dunk them under the water and hold them under there 15 minutes, knowing that humans cannot stay underwater 15 minutes. If they died, then they were innocent. If they didn't die, they were considered a witch or warlock. For another example of the practice of the Puritans, they would tie a person to a stake and set up hay all around the feet, and they would set that person on fire while chanting. If this person survived, then they were a warlock or witch, but if they burned at the stake and died, they were innocent. So this is one of the practices that was picked up by one of the groups or white supremacists when you're burning crosses in front of people's homes and setting people on fire in front of their family as two horses pull and separate their body during the burning. And this started some of these strange pagan practices that has been going on in this country since its inception. So when we speak of the term "in God we trust," at this point, we have no idea what God they trust, or do we? It is very clear and apparent that even the Catholic Church didn't understand what God was these Puritans trusting And over a period of time, even the Catholic Church is now in this country. So the question still lingers. What God are they trusting? We have many other examples to look at to try to understand what God are they trusting, especially when you look at the holidays, such as Valentine's Day, Halloween, and Christmas. These give some of the greatest examples of the history of the occult and pagan rituals of this country. Now, being that majority of these holidays and practices started during the early times of the creation of this country, it gives you a greater idea on what transpired from its inception. So at this point, we get the idea of what was going on with King Henry VIII and the Catholic Church against the Puritans, which they considered prosecution. But as they crossed the Atlantic and came here, they started prosecuting everyone else. So looking at the governance of this nation and the actions they take for their justice or injustice or righteousness, you get an idea of what's hanging onto the underbelly of this country they call Babylon. Many of the weapons and torture devices used in the early creation of this country were created by the religious organizations and then moved over and used during the enslaved period of the Africans and Native Africans. The slave trade started in 1619. The Pilgrims came over in 1620. I guess from that point on, you can understand the math. It was ingrained into this country before it became a country in 1776, which wouldn't be until another 156 years. It was already practicing its biggest curse under the name of religion. So it seems they were on the hunt for witches and warlocks and not practicing the habits of being righteous. So at this point, they're doing paganistic actions and paganistic rituals and also deep into the occult. So when they speak of "In God We Trust," I repeat, what God are they trusting? So in conclusion, the purpose of this video is to get you to see the founding principles of this country, where it came from, and that it's still here. England didn't even want it in their country, but it came here and now has festered and have become an infection that still is in the underbelly of this country. And now it's to the forefront and to your door. And this festering infection eventually caused the Civil War and everything to do with race relations up until this point. They were persecuting each other, so they have no problem persecuting the rest of the world. You can only imagine what is in the heart, minds, and souls of whatever this entity and infestation that is in this country is. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and like. And don't forget to click the bell so that you're notified when we upload new videos and content. I am you and you are me. We are the roots of the tree. Family is heaven. I seek righteousness, I see righteousness, and I be righteousness. Love, peace, and power. Pharaoh J. Tassetti.